Okay, Dwight is not. Kurt will not be here. Joel's here. Vanessa's here. Tripp's here. I'm here. Tom, Brad here. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Harris is here. Jason? Yeah, okay, good. Gordon's here. Linda and Steve are on the, well, however they are. They are not here in person, but they're here. So.
I'm here.
We're here. I'm sorry, did I miss you? Well, I think I said the people I saw. Okay, so, Public Safety Department. Are you ready, Chief?
Yes, sir.
Here we go.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Warren Hensman, and I'm the Public Safety Chief, and I'll be presenting DPS's recommended budget for fiscal 22. Thank you, Council and Budget Committee members, for allowing me to provide the presentation, but also to the team members that I see to my right. I wouldn't have been able to do this without this group, especially my command staff and executive assistant that spent numerous hours and days working on this presentation. So just to give you an overview of tonight's agenda, we'll just kind of review the council goals. We'll go over the DPS department organization, since we're a pretty robust organization and take up the lion's share of staff within the city. Provide a budget summary of fire, police, and support divisions. We'll do an agency overview of the police, support, fire rescue, and then we'll delve into some of the support services that are so important within our community, and that's crisis support services, sobering center. And then we'll talk a little bit about our fleet, because we're such a large organization, we have a pretty massive fleet, so I think it's important to share those numbers with you all. And then in conclusion, we'll jump into future challenges, because we have quite a few, and I think it's important to share with this body of men and women the challenges that we're expecting as we move forward. So our council goal setting goals in front of you there are to enhance community safety. One of them is obviously to pass a police and fire levy in just a few days. Also, a prevention-focused community policing to help reduce crime and build public trust. I share this with my team quite often, and it's all about building trust and nurturing legitimacy within your organization. Utilizing technology and social media to produce positive outcomes relative to the improvements within public safety practices, and obviously to enhance a safe and secure environment. But we take it a step further and we talk about a goal of providing cooperative shared leadership involving council, staff, and our community. And for this particular goal, we're talking about the fire division internal restructure. And essentially, we're looking into the ability to provide equitable leadership and management to include that appropriate span and control to support all levels within the fire rescue division. So the organizational structure for DPS, as you can see, we've been a public safety department since the early 1980s. We are the only public safety department in the state of Oregon, and one of only a few, I would imagine, across the United States. So within the Department of Public Safety, you have one chief, so one executive and one administration, however, 3 departments. And as you can see, we have the police department, the fire department, and the support, which is made up of our dispatch 911 and our records division. We believe it's important to provide a service level commitment. And yes, these are a few bullets that you'll see in front of you, but the Department of Public Safety, we feel, go above and beyond as a best practice organization, and we will promise that we will continue to be a best practice organization moving forward. But essentially, we are going to provide a full service law enforcement patrol, criminal investigation, narcotics task force participation, full service fire rescue division. We'll continue the school resource officer and the school marshal program within District 7. And we'll continue to use an intelligence-led approach. We have an intelligence-led briefing system that we introduced over the last about 18 months, kind of similar to CompStat that some of the bigger organizations utilize, and it's been very successful to hold ourselves accountable, but to also resolve problems within our community. maintain adequate firefighter staffing levels, maintain adequate police officer staffing levels, and then that fire prevention piece that I know council has worked on along with the fire division folks over the last couple of months, but to increase the number of annual inspections, code enforcement, planned review, and maintain that fire-wise community philosophy. Executive summary in front of you, the fiscal year adopted budget was $26 million. This year's recommended budget, you'll see a decrease of 3.8%, and we are recommending $25,352,272. I also thought it was important at this stage in the presentation to share with you, prior to learning about our budget shortfall and the shortfall work that we did as a council, as a staff, as a community, we were estimating $27 million. So as you can see with this recommended budget, we put a lot of work into this and we were able to bring that number down significantly. Continuing with the executive summary, you'll see the recommended budget is 3.8% down from last year. And then we anticipate a projected fiscal 23 budget that will be approximately 4.3% increase over next year. So let's talk about the services. Let's talk about the department. Police operations. Police operations have 67 full-time employees. They're made up of our patrol staff, our community service officers, our evidence technicians. We have a crime analyst, and our criminal investigations division, our major crimes unit, our drug task force. This is a robust group of men and women that provide incredible service to the community of Grants Pass. So proud of them. But I would be remiss if I didn't share that we did, during this process, freeze 2 police officers and 1 CSO. And also to share with you that we also have 5 police officer vacancies, and we're anticipating another CSO vacancy. So the recruitment and retention in public safety this year is becoming problematic, but we are going to work through these problems, and we are confident that we'll be able to hire some of the best and brightest, but it will take time. For example, it takes about 18 months from hiring to background investigating to field training, the academy, to put somebody in a patrol car by themselves. So it's going to take some time, but we're up for the challenge. Continuing on with police operations, you know, we typically talk about specialty programs, but I thought today it was incredibly important to start off with our patrol team concept, because the patrol officers, the patrol men and women, are the backbone of any policing organization. So I wanted to start off giving those folks a shout out, because they're the ones at 4 o'clock in the morning when someone's calling for help. They'll be there as quick as they possibly can. But we're going to maintain that school resource officer program to school marshals. We have a drug recognition expert program for our driving under the influence. We maintain an amazing SWAT team and negotiations team. And I've mentioned to council on several occasions that we're on a bit of an island in Grants Pass, and we absolutely need to keep these men and women on our SWAT team and our negotiations team trained and ready for when we call. We have a traffic team. We have a canine team. We are a little bit sad that we retired Canine Brock along with Sergeant Jeff Gaunt recently. So we're going to have to work on getting another canine to fill that gap. And then our community response team that are so visible these days, especially with the Riverside Park camping and the new unhoused concerns that we have in our parks. These folks are downtown every single day. They're on duty, and they're interacting with everybody from the community to keep our town as safe and holding people accountable as well. So moving on to policing strategies and kind of keeping with that flow. Intelligent-led policing, to me, analyzing data, but also using some common sense practices and techniques are incredibly important to an organization of our size. We're very, very busy, and we have a robust, at times, criminal element that cause problems for our city. So we utilize that intelligent-led policing model. And what that means is that the command staff that you see to my right are held accountable, along with myself, every single month to report on what's going on in this jurisdiction. And it's not as simple as crime is up. Okay, if crime is up, what's the solution? How are we going to bring it down? So we work as a team, we collaborate with our partners to help come up with solutions to problem solve some of our crime stats that you'll see as we move forward in the presentation. Our community response team that we talked about, the school marshals, huge and very important element within the school district. There was some talk a few months ago even of possibly losing school resource officers and school marshals when a lot of different police reform topics hit the headlines. And the school marshals and the school resource officers are revered and adored, and they are staying put, so we're happy to share that. Utilizing technology and social media, as I spoke to earlier, and then that prevention-focused community policing philosophy to help reduce crime, but to continue to build that trust, which nurtures that police legitimacy element that we so need as we push forward into this new age of police reform. So here's a look at some of the numbers. You'll see some numbers that look good, and then you see some numbers that don't look so good. But the way I look at these numbers, especially when I compare them to some agencies that are actually bigger than Grants Pass, we have a lot of work to do still. But those reduction in aggravated assaults, for example, that's a massive reduction. But still, the aggravated assault crime category is a serious felony, and we need to bring those numbers down as best that we can. You'll also see some of those reductions in burglaries, for example. COVID struck about 2019, 2020. I expected those burglary numbers to be down a little bit more. I am a little bit concerned that we might see increases in burglary as we come out of this age of COVID when more and more people go back to work. So we're going to be keeping a close eye on that. I had a conversation earlier with one of the committee members about the forcible rape number going down to almost 40%. And people might consider that a good number. That's a terrible number. Rape is one of the most underreported crimes in the United States, and we need to do a better job to break down that barrier of reporting. And we have some strategies in place this year that we hope to bring more survivors of sexual assault to the department with the help of Women's Crisis Support Team to actually see that number go up, because that's what you want. Homicides, that's not a good number. We've had our fair share of homicides in the city. We've had our fair share of homicides in the county. And as a reminder, Grants Pass Police are part of the Major Crimes Unit response. So last year, for example, there were 10 homicides in Josephine County. Your Grants Pass detectives responded to 9. And I'm confident saying without Grants Pass detectives, they probably wouldn't have all been resolved. As early as just a couple of weeks ago, we helped the Sheriff's Department along with the Oregon State Police resolve a double homicide, and that had a lot to do with Grants Pass detectives. So I'm proud of them for that kind of work. Motor vehicle theft, we're keeping a close eye on that. We're seeing it creep up. And then the robberies, that's another number we got to keep a close eye on, starting to go up. Assaults. This is a very difficult number to see because a lot of those assaults are linked to domestic violence. And we're pretty confident that linkage and comparison has a lot to do with restrictions to the home and COVID-19. And I'm sure there are many other factors and elements as to the why, but we're going to continue to try to bring that number down as we move into 2021 or the rest of 2021. The drug law violations, Measure 110, we'll talk about a little bit later on, but I'm sure that's had a bit of an effect on that. But I can guarantee you that the Dewey numbers, you're going to start to see an increase in Dewey arrests that's driving under the influence of intoxicants. I'm pretty confident we're going to see an increase in that number this year. And what that really means is there's no less number of people driving drunk. You need to have the officers in the field to stop them and to investigate these DUI cases. Then when we see that number go up, I feel that's a good thing. I feel that's we're holding ourselves accountable and is what the community expects. The embezzlement number, you might be surprised by. The reality of that is we just don't have the manpower and or the staffing to spend much of any time working fraud cases. That's why that number's low. There's so many person crimes and other crimes that take a front seat that that actually unfortunately takes a back seat. And then some of the other numbers as we kind of go down there, the vandalism and that crime damage number, that's excessive. We do think that has a lot to do with increased graffiti, but also to unauthorized entry into motor vehicles, smashing windows. You also get a comparison along that same vein. The weapons offenses, a lot of people out there with guns. A lot of people out there with guns commit felonies. And then when our detectives, when our officers, when our drug task force team are out there just doing the work they do, it's not uncommon for RAID, for example, to seize 8, 12 firearms during a raid on a home that is selling narcotics. Calls for service. This will show you what the men and women of Grants Pass are doing every single day. So officer-initiated calls, as you can see in 2020, a little over 24,000. It's a lot of calls. Self-initiated officer calls. That's in addition to citizen-initiated calls that are almost at 35,000. It ebbs and flows as the years go by, but I can tell you that the teams are very busy indeed and can use all the support they can get, actually. We do have a dedicated traffic team. Right now, due to some of our staffing shortages, that's actually down to just one officer. So we are going to work hard to get that position filled as best that we can so we can have 2 traffic officers on that team hitting the parkway during those right hours, hitting those intersections, hitting those streets that we know where there's a lot of speeders and traffic infractions so we can bring down the traffic accident numbers in our city. This is just a slide I wanted to show you that gives you kind of an overview of what type of citations are happening out there. And this is an interesting slide I wanted to add. It gives you a comparison to traffic stops and traffic crashes. So we feel that the more traffic stops and accountability and education that we can provide folks out there that might be speeding or committing some violations, the less traffic crashes that we will have, which could be fatalities also in our city. And then the proactive policing prevention piece. We have an amazing auxiliary team, volunteer force that do so much for us, above and beyond what you see on the screen. Handicap parking patrols, downtown foot patrols, vacation house checks when we're away, city park patrols, our special events, and then just support in general. And then those 2 men that you see there are 2 school resource officers. Because of their big bright smile, we tend to use them on recruiting photos as well. So that's a couple of our guys right there. This next slide, and I'll take a quick swig of water because this mask is sometimes tough. This gives you an idea of the work the community service officers do around here. And you must remember, if the community service officers weren't doing this, this workload would fall on the police officer. And frankly, the police officer probably would not have that much time to prioritize these type of calls for service or these type of problems in our community. Something as simple as auto crash response, downtown foot patrol, transient camp abatement, graffiti abatement, traffic control, special events, parking enforcement, lost and found property. The fleet support is huge, and when you see the number of vehicles we have, that'll make a lot more sense to you. Also, too, the procurement of supplies and equipment. We could, frankly, use somebody just to do procurement of supplies and equipment alone. That job is so intense and busy. Crime scene processing, and then some police reports are taken when there's no suspect involved. We were all hoping to see Boatnik this year, and that's just one of the special events that public safety supports, along with the Christmas parade and fairgrounds events and March for Life, and there's so much going on in our town, and we look forward to getting back in the saddle and supporting our community with these community events. But we're also a big part in helping prepare and helping them initiate and have a successful event. The evidence property room is huge. When I first got here, there was only one property specialist, and on a side note, it can cause police chiefs, chief of public safety, for example, myself, a lot of problems if you don't have a squared away evidence room that houses the drugs, the money, the guns, and jewelry. And I kind of like my job, so we made sure that that place was in top shape. That place has always been in top shape. It didn't need me, but Paul, one of our evidence property specialists, absolutely needed a second. Council agreed, and we were able to get that position placed in there last year. So it's a 3,500 square foot facility. You can see that multi-tiered approach, or that storage facility. There's a lot of property that comes and goes through there. One of the problems that we try to resolve is to get the evidence we don't need anymore out of there, the purging process. The more we can purge, the more we can put in, and the less likely we'll need a bigger facility, and that's something we actually don't want. Now our RAID team, that's the Rogue Area Drug Enforcement team, started in 2009. They're comprised with some amazing partners like our Oregon State Police, Josephine County District Attorney's Office, the best organization, the Grants Pass Department of Public Safety, along with Josephine County Community Corrections. Nobody's laughing, so that means I'm in deep trouble. Also, too, it's important to remember in 2017, that focus shifted from the marijuana eradication within our city to that hard drug, the meth, the heroin, the cocaine. So we paid close attention to that, and we believe that it helped those numbers. And if you refer back to your stats sheet, you'll see those numbers of unlawful entry into motor vehicles actually decline over the years. So we think the robust efforts of that team really helped bring that down. But I also wanted to share ballot measure 110. And ballot measure 110 deals with the decriminalization of meth and heroin for small user quantity amounts. Excuse me. We've taken a different stand in Grants Pass, and we've decided that anybody that's in possession of user quantities of meth, heroin, or cocaine, they'll receive a citation, and we'll help guide them into treatment, into services. That is not always the case because, as you well know, people suffering from the disease of addiction, they have to be ready before they take that jump. But we feel if we at least hold them accountable to a citation, although all they need to do is call a hotline and that citation goes away, we're doing our part to at least encourage them to seek some sort of treatment. I saw the numbers today for the state of Oregon, and Josephine County has the most citations in the state of Oregon to date. And that's not really a number to boast about or be proud of, but it also shares with you and the community that we hold ourselves accountable, but we also want to help people suffering and hold them accountable, at least to try to give them a nudge to get into some sort of treatment. And then take a look at those stats. 26 pounds of meth, almost 3 pounds of heroin, and the numbers go down. Guns seized, 134. Drug endangered children helped, 21. Cases initiated, 117. This is a small team that do a heck of a lot of work, great work in our community, but also support other communities in Southern Oregon. Moving on to the executive summary, you'll see a lot of negatives in here, and that's simply because of the budget shortfall and the preparation for this year's budget. And we feel we did a good job bringing those numbers down. And as you can see, personnel services down almost 338,000. Materials and supplies, we brought it down 53,000. Contractual professional services, 30. 6,000 direct charges, 18 capital outlay, indirect charges, direct charges, debt service, and then that transfer to capital, lands and buildings. That's that equipment replacement account that we started during last budget year, and we still wanted to maintain that LB. Moving on to our support services. This is the team of 911 communicators, our dispatchers, and our records division professionals. They make about 27 FTEs for the team. Also, too, during some of these budget shortfall conversations, topics, and nights, we froze one dispatcher and one records specialist. We currently have 2 dispatch vacancies, and we currently have 2 dispatchers that are looking for employment elsewhere. We hope they change their mind. The dispatch center is a consolidated communication center. The interagency dispatch center, which is providing contracted dispatch services, 911 call taking, 911 agency manager contract, fire accountability team, and SWAT negotiation scribes. And essentially the fire accountability team and the SWAT negotiation scribes, they just are out there supporting a major fire incident or supporting a major SWAT incident. And the men and women out there working those particular incidents would be lost without them. So we're really happy to have them trained and prepared and willing to do that job in the field as well. But look at those numbers. 62,000 911 calls came into Josephine County. 31,000 non-emergency lines. And that doesn't account for all those times that police officers and firefighters and the like were walking down the street and a citizen called them over for some support and some help. The Consolidated Communication Center, continuing on, it's the Josephine County 911 answering point. The 911 agency contract is held here, and then we support Grants Pass DPS, obviously, Rural Metro, Illinois Valley, Wolf Creek, Williams, Oregon Department of Forestry, and AMR. Our records team, they currently are staffed with 7 FTEs, a supervisor, and 6 public safety specialists. They handle a lot. It's a very, very difficult assignment because it's not just maintaining the records. They're not just the keepers of the records, but they're also an answering point too. They're an initial call taking person, and then they transfer those calls onto our dispatch center. So they're as much of a dispatcher at times as they are a record specialist. It's an incredibly difficult position to pass probation on, but when we get folks through the process, we want to hold on to them tight because they're absolutely outstanding. And then you take a look at some of the stats that they're managing. 45,000 non-emergent calls, calls for service, the entries, the record keeping. Those numbers are incredible. The team is short right now, and then you throw 6 and vacations and FMLAs in there, and they're an amazing crew and they manage an awful lot. The executive summary for the support division, as is in your packet in front of you and behind me tonight. We were also able to bring the personal services down, 155,000. Materials and supplies, 12,000. Slight increase in professional services, but for a communication center, you're always going to have increases in software, equipment, and things like that. That's a very minor increase, in fact. And then indirect charges that are unavoidable with admin and IT costs. Moving on, it's been a year for our fire service in general in Southern Oregon. Our fire operations, 33 FTEs. Amazing group, doing amazing work within 3 stations, 24/7, 365 days a year. Incredibly proud of this team. They can manage structural and wildland fires, and they do. Medical and vehicle extrications. They have technical expertise in confined space, rope, and water rescue. And I think we have some work to do in some of those technical arenas, water rescue being one of them. So if my fire rescue team are listening to me tonight, I've heard you, and I believe we need to do some work on that as well. Our student firefighter program, it had to come down a little bit because of the budget shortfall. But Lang Johnson and his team at our 3 fire stations have a target of 5 students, and we believe strongly in bringing young people into our department and encouraging them to be successful full-time firefighters. The engine companies continue to do business inspections, and we have 2 fantastic SWAT medics that are attached to the police SWAT mission. So currently there's 2 firefighter vacancies, but we're in the middle of a hiring process, and I saw some faces or some names on there that I happen to know, so I'm excited about who's gonna finish 1 and 2, actually, so I look forward to that. And then continuing on with fire prevention, that fire and life safety education piece has taken a wee bit of a back seat with the COVID. So we're looking forward to getting out there and doing more of that. We're looking forward to doing more business inspections. We're looking forward to being able to go out there and hook up a car seat for a new mom, new dad. Getting those fire investigations moving. The building plan reviews, helping out with the city, fire code enforcement, life safety inspections, like I said, but also too, and as you well know, we're going to continue to work on that integrated fire plan and that cohesive wildfire strategy because we believe in that partnership as well. And then we're going to continue that Firewise community philosophy that we have and the Firewise coordinator who continues to do an outstanding job for this city. Some stats you see up there. Busy. That's all I can say. Running 2 alarms, running the crashes, running the fires. Lots of stuff going on. But we are going to try to beef up our inspections, our company inspections, and try to be more forward in resolving some of those problems. I think we're starting to see the back end of COVID, and I think it's almost time that we start to lead the charge and getting back out there in our community. Fire rescue calls for service, busy. As you can see, it's increasing. It continues to increase from 2010 to 2020. So you're looking at about 3,800 in 2010 to 4,800 in 2020. Emergency response times. They are serious about getting there on time, getting changed out, getting in that engine, getting there to support our citizens that need the help. As I've often said, if it were me, if it were my family, as soon as I see or hear that big red truck, there's a sense of relief. And I think for every single citizen in this community, there's a sense of relief when that fire engine is coming close to support them. And here's some of the fire operation numbers that you can see. Personnel, not a big decrease with personnel, 17,000. Materials and supplies, 44,000. Professional services, 71. Direct charges, 4,000. Capital outlay, 78. And then administration, IT, and then that transfer to the capital lands and buildings. That's that equipment savings account for the future. And that kind of rounds out the executive summary for fire operations. Then continuing on, crisis support services. I know there's probably going to be a question out there because you'll see the change in the math. Unfortunately, Hearts with a Mission are no longer supported within this line item within our presentation tonight. But we do continue to support Women's Crisis Support Team, who are one of our strong partners and allies, and we work together to resolve problems in domestic violence and sexual assault in the city of Grants Pass. Some of the numbers I provided there are pretty staggering. 933 phone contacts, 68 survivors sheltered, 63 children, 1,800 shelter nights, and 6,000 meals. That's a lot that they do. And that's just the data. That doesn't really tell those extra hours that the men and women of Women's Crisis Support Team put in to support a family, a woman, a man in need in their time of crisis. And then the Sobering Center. We'd be lost without the Sobering Center. We really love the Sobering Center because it provides an opportunity to take somebody so we don't have to put them into the criminal justice system. We're not perfect people, so we know if somebody is acting out, possibly because they're overly intoxicated, why not take them to the Sobering Center instead of taking them to the jail on a disorderly conduct charge? when if they go to the sobering center, we can get them dried out and we can get them moved into wraparound services on their way out the door. Like any addiction, it doesn't always work that way, but we're going to try our best and we're going to continue to try our best. The average amount of lodgings, as you can see, 3.6 persons lodged per day. That's a big number. That's a really, really big number. 556 city cases. The jail can't handle that many people. So it would end up being a revolving door, or it would end up being a cite and release, and we'd still have that problem. So we need to have a place where we can house somebody that's having a difficult time controlling himself or herself until they're better. But look at that number on self-admits. I think that's pretty amazing. It's great that we share with the community that we have this resource out there, and 405 self-admits says a lot about us as a community. This is almost saved for last because that's a big number, our fleet. We drive a lot of miles. We have a lot of cars. We have great vehicles and we're appreciative of it. The vehicles, these ones will last us for a long time. 14 fire vehicles, it's a mix of engines and different types of staff vehicles. 43 police cars, support vehicles. But it costs a lot of money to run an organization of our size. So the maintenance cost, we've actually brought that down significantly to $675,000 for fiscal year 22. And then that equipment replacement, let's just say fiscal 22 also, we brought that down as well to $650,000. And that's so we are prepared when we need new vehicles so we can go buy them. Does it mean we have to buy them just because they hit a 5-year benchmark? No, it doesn't. We assess. We always assess with everything that we do. Efficiency measures. We talked about the police cadet program before. We've talked about intelligent-led work in general, both for fire and police, and for dispatch and for records. That sobering center partnership. The community response team that are working downtown every single day. Our community service officers, our school marshals, which we want to try to grow that program because it is an outstanding program. Student firefighters and our records support staff. Now the last couple of slides are the biggies, to share with you all what are our future challenges, because there's plenty of them, and we need to do this as a community, as a team, if we're going to work ourselves into the best place possible for this community. My team know it. We build trust and we nurture legitimacy every single day, but we can't not turn away from police reform. We got to look ahead on, and we got to have the courage to stand up to it, even though it might feel a little frightening and feel a little difficult, because it is that change piece that everybody feels worried about change, but we're going to embrace change. Multiple House bills have passed, and we're going to see multiple police reform happening this year in the state of Oregon. I'm proud to share with you, much of this means nothing to the Grants Pass Department of Public Safety because we're already doing it. We've been doing it for years. So we'll adjust a little bit as necessary, but we'll move forward and we'll support the change. The levy funding needs no explanation. Recruitments, retirements, retention, morale. We got to look at that one head on. And we got to ask ourselves the tough questions. Maybe it's somebody that is my age that doesn't relate as well to somebody that's 22. So we got to look at everything and recognize what is inspiring our people to be servant leaders in our community. The police and fire restructuring that we talked about. Policing demands to our county and county funding. No idea what's going to happen with the county funding mechanism in the years to come. How do we attract new qualified candidates in police, dispatch, fire rescue divisions? How do we find that right number for staffing? What is that adequate level of staffing? We're going to continue to work on that. But we're going to use our matrices that which is essentially our research and our proofs, the PAVE audits, to work on that. We all know about the catastrophic risk of wildfire. I won't beat that dead horse. And that is not a good way to say it. I just caught myself say that. However, Alameda, Aubuchane, Slater, horrible, absolutely horrible. We have to do everything in our power to try to not have similar things happen within our county. Maybe we consider adopting a residential sprinkler ordinance. That's pretty much unheard of. Most people probably would not go after that, but it is a recommendation. It's something we can talk about later. Threat assessment teams. There are more and more shootings in the United States, and if you think that we are not susceptible to it, I think we are fooling ourselves. We prepare and we plan for the worst case scenario as often as we possibly can. Fiscal year 21, we had 2 officer-involved shootings that involved multiple Grants Pass police officers. Incredibly traumatic time, but also too, it was a moment for me, I'm proud of the men that day that ran towards the gunshots to do what they were asked to do for their community. We have to look at peaceful protests and how do we support peaceful protests and also make sure that it doesn't turn into civil unrest. We talk about building trust and nurturing legitimacy. I talk about procedural justice all the time, equity, diversity and inclusion. We got to tackle these things head on. Technology and law enforcement's advancing at a fast pace. The problem is it's expensive. Online reporting, we're going to really grab a hold of it this year and run with it because we do have an online reporting mechanism. So with some of our reductions, we're going to utilize that more frequently. Career development, we are hiring some of the best people. We want them to stay in Grants Pass. We want them to take my job when the time is right. We want them to take Lang's job and Jim's job and Todd's job and Melissa's job when the time is right. What's that? Not yet. I got a couple more years before I retire. I'm younger than I look. And then the unhoused, people that are homeless, people that are unhoused. We got to figure out how do we are part of that solution as well. So we're all working together towards that. So in conclusion, in my summary, our police officers, firefighters, community service officers, record specialists, support personnel, dispatchers, and volunteers are doing an outstanding job during challenging times. We, public safety in the city, must remain forward-thinking to be successful so we can manage costs while delivering the very best service that our community not only deserves but demands. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation and I'm up for questions.
All right, Gordon.
I got several questions, but I don't want to hog the floor. First off, you show a debt service of about $500,000. Where does that debt service and what does it service?
So the $500,000, because that's the only bill I know that's the public safety building, that would be your public safety building.
Okay. And I guess to the finance, Adam, how long is that going to last?
10 years, I believe. Correct, Adam? 8 years. I was off by 2.
Well, no, 8 left.
8 left.
It's my understanding at that point, will be a debt left that will refinance, am I correct?
Thanks, Adam.
As soon as we have the opportunity to potentially refinance that debt for a more advantageous position for the city, we will definitely be considering that, yes.
Okay, how long till we can?
I believe that's another 7 years before we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Gordon?
Have you worked anything with the businesses downtown to tie in their remote cameras into your system so you can utilize private resources to help you do better policing?
Yeah, we have. We've looked into that. I think it's called the SCRAM program, basically utilizing other surveillance systems for the benefit of catching criminals. The problem is we can't obviously be piped into their system. So we ask not just our businesses, but our homeowners to register that they actually have cameras. And then if we have a crime that's happened on a particular street, neighborhood, or downtown area, we can reach out to that person and ask for that video surveillance tape.
Okay.
Ferris?
Yes, Chief, is there anything that you want or need that you're unable to ask for because of budget constrictions?
If I heard the question right, is there anything I need that I haven't asked for tonight? Yes. I need about 6 more firefighters. I think it's important to have 3 to an engine. I think it's important to maybe start off with 3-to-1 engine at one station, not all 3 stations. So if I could have my way, that would be 1. Our police staff are swamped. Mr. Simpson, they're swamped. So they are run ragged. They respond to about 1,200 calls per day, and they're very busy. And if I could get our teams up to 8 with 1 supervisor, that would make me happy. But we're going to work on it, I hope.
Gordon?
How many more firefighters would you need to increase your ISO rating from, say, 6 to 7, if that's possible? Because that would be a savings back to the community.
I'm going to throw that question to Lang Johnson. I don't know too much about the insurance world or ISO ratings. I would imagine if we can continue to build our fire service and respond to calls faster with more efficiency and safely, that might help, but I'm not sure.
We're currently in ISO 2. Without digging into the very specifics of it, my best guess at this point, we'd have to double our staff to make an impact on moving towards a level, ISO 1, which is the highest that you can have. What you have, though, is a diminishing return with community investment, and that's a hard number to pin down to see whether those numbers will balance or not. That's why you don't see a lot of ISO 1 fire services within the country.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I would also just finish the question too, or share a little bit of a difference between policing and fire. There are mutual aid within the fire service, so rural metro is readily available in different fire agencies. On the policing side of the house, it's just not the same. Our police officers are out there alone, and you're not getting help from Jackson County unless it's pretty serious. So I just wanted to add that piece as well.
Brian?
Yeah, thank you, Chief. That was an outstanding presentation. I think at the beginning of this year, we had kind of a rough start with the new council and having to balance the budget right off the bat. And I think that was hard on everybody. And I just want to let you know that Public Safety has my full support. And I very much appreciate all of the work that you guys do. Just a couple minor questions. You said that you have 1 traffic officer, and I was just wondering, is that 1 traffic officer in total or 1 per shift?
It's 1 in total. We typically have 2. And in a city our size, we could definitely use 3. But the 2 is super important because you have obviously the increased traffic volume that goes through our town quite often, but the traffic accident reconstruction element is huge. They are our reconstruction experts when unfortunately there's a death due to a traffic accident. The average patrol officer is not skilled to work that type of a crash. It takes years of education and training to work that, but it's 1 person, that's it right now.
I see, okay. And then on the Sobering Center, you referenced that there was 405 self-admits,
Yeah.
which is pretty amazing. And I just was wondering do you have any indication of how those self-admits come to happen? Because I could imagine a scenario where, for example, if I was homeless and it was winter, maybe I'll just, go to the Sobering Center.
I think it's more along the lines of a friendly nudge as well. So for example, our colleagues in the county may come across an individual in need of sobering services, and they may provide a friendly nudge to get them to self-admit into the sobering center. And on a cold winter's night, I think that's a wonderful friendly nudge to provide somebody in the woods.
Great, thank you. And then on your list of future challenges, I don't want to get into those tonight, but I look forward to having further discussions on those in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Tom?
Thank you, Chief. That was a good presentation. My concern is about training and staff development. You've described a lot of challenges that indicate change is the norm. There are always different expectations and need for continuous training. Does this budget provide adequate support for training and professional development?
It does, actually. When we went through the process, council will recall, I tried my best to minimize certain things. The training budget and the overtime budget were 2 of the items that we couldn't lose, because when we start to lose the ability to send our men and women to training, we're not going to have the people we want work in the street. But do we need to do a better job? We do. We need to work on additional programs. We need to figure out how to get past the COVID difference, start hosting trainings here in town. But I'm here to tell you, sir, you have a group of patrol officers, for example, that are leading the charge and self-training. They are asking people to come to Grants Pass. We have the new training center over there, and there's been several trainings in the last couple of months that I think other agencies might not be ready to do yet because of COVID. But we want to start leading the charge and be that best practice organization with career development and training. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Brian?
I had another question, but it's probably more for not the chief, so I wasn't sure. Maybe we should finish with the chief first.
Vanessa?
For that presentation, that was great. You mentioned a couple of times the Fire Rescue Division internal restructure, and also the fact that our city is very unique in having a Department of Public Safety, and I don't believe that's because we're forward innovators. I believe we may be outdated in that practice. Can you explain what a Fire Rescue Division internal restructure would look like under a Department of Public Safety?
Yeah, it's first going to look like a lot of work in making it happen, but I think it's something of great value and something that we need to consider because there are best practices within the fire department in the fire world that I actually can't provide them because I'm a police officer. I'm a police officer by trade. I'm not trained as a firefighter, but because of the requirements for police, you cannot have a fire chief run a police department. It just can't happen. It's illegal, in fact. So I think that there might be some things that we are missing as an organization. But I also think that if you have a fire chief who is solely responsible for that department, they can continue to work on innovative ways and best practice models to bolster their mission. Because frankly, as you pointed out, Councillor, I'm pretty busy. I'm pretty swamped managing the three organizations. And I was never this gray before, so I'm really disappointed in my hair. But neither here nor there. It's something that I think is important to work through for the good of the city and for the good of the organization. I have some ideas that I'll share with council as we progress on this journey that I think we can make something work. But it's definitely a work in progress. And like I did mention, we are the only one in the state of Oregon that is doing it that way. The initial model was based upon one being able to do the other's job. Police officers are not doing firefighter jobs, and firefighters are not doing police officer jobs. The only thing that makes public safety unique is me, because I oversee all three divisions. When typically in policing, a police chief will deal with police departments and 911, and a fire chief will deal with the fire department. Does that answer your question?
Go ahead, Gordon.
What's your relationship with both the DA and the courts? Obviously, if you look at Portland, it's totally dysfunctional.
We have an outstanding relationship with the DA and the courts. Absolutely outstanding. Our DA, absolutely outstanding. It's a great relationship.
Good.
So I have a question. Your drug statistics, methamphetamine 26 pounds, heroin 3 pounds, cocaine 1, other controlled substances 116,000 pounds. What is that, bricks or, I mean, that's a lot of weight.
Yeah, you're talking pills, you're talking ecstasy. You got there's a lot of stuff out there. Part of the Measure 110 ballot that came down, it's actually legal to have less than 40 oxy pills in your pocket. I'm not sure why anybody needs 40 oxy pills in their pocket, but that's a fact. So yeah, that all other category is everything else that I couldn't put on the sheet.
Vanessa?
Under the major crimes chart, I'm showing arson is up 90%, almost 91%. Can you touch on that?
That's a difficult one to put your finger on. Arson's an extremely difficult crime to resolve. Our fire marshal investigates that with help from our major crimes team. It's a bit of an anomaly, but also too, sometimes where we might have suspicion that it is an arson, after we do a full-blown investigation that can take several months, it might actually turn out not to be. So those numbers might even be a little skewed.
Valerie?
Yes, Warren, great presentation, and I do truly appreciate all that you do in our community.
Thank you.
And I was just at a meeting this afternoon, and we were talking about the fact that, and the DA was there, and we were talking about cartels in our area and how it has become known, and it truly is just kind of basic knowledge out there that they have moved in. So do our raid officers work with the county in those sorts of operations of that sort of thing, or can you give me some information about what you found?
Yeah, without going into too much detail, yeah, the answer is yes. You're talking about drug trafficking organizations. You're talking about a rogue area drug enforcement team that partner with our other drug teams in Josephine County, with the state, and even in different counties north and south of us. But drug trafficking organizations are alive and well in our town. And that worries me greatly, especially when my team bring me an ops plan for a raid on a property that's 5 acres and is expected to be in contact with multiple people. And there's the assumption that there's not only going to be dogs and different concerns like barred windows, but you could bet your bottom dollar there's going to be plenty of guns around as well. So when you hit or you conduct a search warrant or a raid on a property that is believed to be part of a drug trafficking organization, it is very intense, and it worries me quite a bit.
Have you found that many of the other crimes are related to that as well in our area?
Yeah, I think everything's related to drugs, quite frankly. I think that if people weren't addicted and suffering from the disease of drug addiction, they wouldn't be stealing. There wouldn't be as many car thefts. There wouldn't be as many break-ins. There wouldn't be as many burglaries. So I think it's all linked. It's all connected. I'm hopeful that maybe after a year of ballot measure 110 that our legislators take a look at what's working and what's not working, and take an honest and sincere look at what's going on in our county. And that's why I mentioned at the start of this, our patrol staff, the men and women that are working a patrol car, they write you a ticket for possession of less than 2 grams of heroin. And a lot of people in other counties aren't doing it. We've wrote 90 tickets so far, so since February. And not to throw anybody under the bus, but our partners to the south have only written 10. And we're just as busy, if not busier.
Okay, thank you.
Rick?
Thank you, Chief. On the executive summary on your capital outlay, it shows a reduction of $78,000. Is that representative of savings on equipment, or?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. It certainly is. So Lang Johnson and I sat down and said, hey, and this is the normal every single year anyway, do we need chainsaws? Do we need whatever the case may be? So we were able to take a look at that, and we were able to bring that number down significantly. So we're not shorting ourselves, if that's your question. But that number will probably increase over the years. So like I mentioned before, if we don't need it, we don't need to buy it. So we were able to bring that number down.
Gordon?
Do you have enough body armor funding that you deem necessary?
Yeah, we do. We have enough. There are grants available. We make sure we have that money available in the budget. In fact, we are purchasing some very necessary ballistic shields for our SWAT and for our patrol teams. They're pretty expensive, but we were able to work that into the budget, and we think they really need that, especially with the criminal element that are carrying weapons these days. We need to outfit our patrol staff with the best equipment that we can, because I think we not only owe it to them, they sincerely deserve it.
Oh, there we go. Tripp?
This is actually, I think, for Adam about the debt service. Sorry for kind of the lingering follow-up. I'm curious why we would wait 7 years to refinance in the current interest rate environment? And then also, can you confirm that that's the bank loan and appendix, was it P that we have?
Could you repeat that last part of the question?
Oh, I'm just looking at appendix P of our budget book and
Right.
looking at, so we have a public safety facilities bank loan. Is that the debt service that we're looking at?
Yes, Appendix P at the very back of the budget document lays out all of the debt service schedules for all of the debt that we have, and that is accurate. The reason that we're having to wait 7 years, and I think it actually might be 6 years, Councilor Lovelace, to correct my previous answer, that is a restriction of the loan, that we won't be able to call it until 7 years from the initiation of the debt.
Okay, so it's like something analogous to a prepayment penalty, or just like a, no, you can't refinance?
That's correct. It's one of the provisions of the debt.
Cool. And then I guess the other question on this would be, so we have a building whose useful life is, I think, quite a bit longer than 8 years, I would hope. Yet the debt we took out to finance it was only an 8-year maturity?
It was a total of 10 years, and we've already got a couple of years under our belt. As far as, is your question referring to?
Well, I'm
setting
just
aside
thinking,
the
like, if I'm
long-term?
going to be using the building for 40 years, like, ideally I'd finance that over 40 years too, right?
I think to extend the repayment schedule of that debt would have increased the total interest. So by keeping that number of years lower, we're trying to reduce the total amount of interest on that debt.
Okay.
Other questions?
I just had one.
Oh, Joel?
So looking forward on that debt, then, is that possible to pay that off early, given the opportunity?
That's where that provision of the original loan comes into play. We won't be able to even consider that until 7 years from the original debt issuance.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Brian?
Yeah, Adam, I'm gonna have another one for you. So earlier this year when we did the budget balancing, we kind of did a course correction to balance the budget. And I know that Adam has referenced previously that the expenditures of public safety are outpacing the revenues. And I don't know those exact percentages. I believe it's expenditures might be going up about 6%, revenues might be going about 3%. Is that close?
That's correct. The main target that we're trying to look for to help ensure financial stability is that the revenues and the expenditures are increasing at the same rate. And what we had seen previously based on our historic data was that, as you said, the expenditures were increasing at 6% and our revenues were increasing at a little over 3%, somewhere between 3 and 4. And as the chief mentioned in his presentation, you see those budget numbers from 22 to 23 increasing at about, it was 4 point something percent, I forget the exact number. But that is a very good indicator that we've performed the course correction that is needed to get those projected revenues and expenditures in line with each other.
So I'm curious if that course correction is something that was kind of a one-time thing, or I don't know for sure yet if that course correction is going to be something that's going to perform for us ongoing, because I see that the requirement coming from the general fund is still increasing every year. This year it looks like 2.6 million, and next year it's projected to be 3.3, and back in 19 it was only 1.1 million. So I have concern about that, and I have concern about the general fund being kind of siphoned off of at an increasing rate. I don't know that that's sustainable.
So that is something that we will definitely be continuing to analyze every single year, trying to look back and see that the course correction has had the desired effect and that it was sufficient, or if it was not. Overcorrecting could have unintended negative consequences, which we would like to avoid, but I think we've done a great first step this year, the decisions that council has made has put us in a good position, certainly as it relates to the potential 3-year term of the levy that will be decided here on May 18th.
So does this budget we're looking at here, are the expenditures and the revenues balanced, those percentages, or you said they're close but not quite?
I don't think there will be many years where it is exactly the same. So you just want to make sure that they're both adjusting in the same general trend. And based on what we're seeing so far, it does look like we're heading in the right direction. We're in a good position.
Okay, thank you.
And Councilor, I would just share with you too that we work incredibly hard, my team and I, on bringing a positive ending fund balance to the general fund every single year. We're going to be well into the $1 million range, and last year close to. So we pay close attention to those dollars, and like I said in the presentation, if we don't have to spend them, we don't.
Other questions? Thank you, Chief. Oh,
I think my
already
question
got
was more
one.
for
Okay.
Adam. I mean, it was just, and like I said, one of the things that I always like to see and I ask for, and I just would like to see it, I think I mentioned it to you, is a breakdown. I mean, we see the money that goes in to public safety, but where would I find it, like it talks about, taxes that come from other areas, and I know that we did increase our lodging tax by 3%, and 30% of that now goes towards public safety, which was another way of bringing more money in, which I think is really important. But I'd like to know, where do I find that in the book? How much is going towards it?
It's in there.
I know, but I never know where to look.
So specifically related to police, page 118 has a lot of that detail related to all of the revenues that are used to support the police division, and you'll see that similar financial table on all of the divisions within public safety. So that is part of the breakdown. You had also mentioned to me previously about the breakdown of the lodging taxes, which I found is not in this current budget, but I will have that breakdown during the lodging tax fund presentation next Thursday.
Okay. Oh, great, thank you. And so other taxes, and I guess that's what I was looking at, as I did look at that page actually, and I saw property taxes, which of course we know are there, and then taxes other, is that, I mean, because I know that also includes franchise fees, am I correct?
I don't think the franchise fees goes directly to the police division.
That goes into the general fund and then out of the general fund. Okay, those are the sorts of things I wanted to know, is whether that is how that franchise fees ran.
I can direct you to one other very helpful page. Let's see. Starting on page 28 is the history of general fund resources. That's more of a breakdown of all of the general fund. I don't think that actually has the detail you're looking for. We do, of course, have the detailed line item budget of every single account that we budget the revenues for that we can make available. It is very detailed, I will warn you. But we can make that available as well.
Okay, thank you.
Gordon?
One last one. This is kind of a macro question. Every year we get strategic plan, public safety is number one. Why don't we 100% fund the number one and take from the 2, 3, 4, and 5? It looks like we cut up by department rather than look at the entire thing. And Eric, Aaron, before you tell me that's council and that's policy, I understand that, but I'm still a taxpayer, and it concerns me that, and I'll give you the example, when I worked for the Navy, you had a guy called a type desk officer, and the ship captain wants 100 things, and he put them in order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they went right down and funded until they ran out of money, and the drinking fountain may have been the last one. Here it looks like we departmentalize it rather than look at the entire thing, and that concerns me.
So we did look at the entire thing. When I say we, council did over a 2.5-month process and looked at it from a level of service perspective of all general fund accounts. So that included community development, parks, economic development, and Parks and Rec, and police, and fire, and support services. And the decisions that were made from a level of service perspective to cut the $1.8 million to balance the budget for the potential 3-year levy term was defined by council over that period of time. Police was and is an important department, but council also recognizes the importance and contributions of all the departments as a whole when it comes to delivering services, and they looked at it from an entirety whole piece because we are a full service city, and broke down. And ultimately I think they went through a great process where they tried to address the budget deficit in a way that cuts and changes can be made without it really having an impact on the constituents and the level of service they would see. And that's part of the reason why a number of departments and divisions were touched. If we said, I think if council said, we're not going to touch public safety at all, it all has to come from everywhere else, there would have been some drastic level of service changes in some of the other general fund operations. Council had an opportunity to take a look at all of the whole piece of general fund and do some reductions in order to help keep the level of service relatively the same for the constituents.
Thank you, Aaron. Other questions? Okay, thank you, Chief. Let's go ahead to community development.
Good evening. I'm Bradley Clark, Community Development Director for about the last 7 months, so I'll be relying quite heavily on our team, who I believe will be coming soon. They, due to the COVID, we've had a space restriction, so they'll be coming in. But so Wendy Giordano is our park superintendent, Ken Sandlin is our building official, Eric Wade is our business operations supervisor, and Susan Cederider is our business advocate. So those are sort of the management supervisor level folks that are in our community development department. So we're gonna, similar to the chief, we're gonna start from the top on overall organizational and then just kind of work our way down through the different departments. Do a review. We're talking tonight about parks and maintenance, aquatics, rec. The parks has those 3 different funds in the budget: maintenance, aquatics and recreation, economic development, tourism, our CD management, the planning division, and our building division. And then we'll end with some showing kind of the efficiency measures that we're using. So here's a look at our team. I'm on the left there, and then we have our CD management, building safety, planning, parks, economic development, tourism, and downtown. Those of you that were on the budget committee last year may notice one big change, and that's property management is no longer in community development. So that's a change that was made over this last year that got shifted to public works. There's 23.6 FTEs in community development right now. The parks, as I mentioned, has our 3 different funds, and the largest one being maintenance. This is where the majority of our operations are at, and that's got a 92% general fund, along with lots of state grants. There's a large federal grant that we actually have been working with as well. The rents and revenues, those add up to another 8% in terms of the revenue. There are 8.1 FTEs. I did just want to point out that if you look at the National Parks and Rec Association, and you look across the country in terms of median numbers of staff per 1,000 population, that number is in the 20s. We're at 8, so we're doing a lot with very few people. 6 of those are really full-time in the field, so they're the ones that you're going to see in the parks doing all of our field work, and when we have repairs and issues with the restrooms and things like that, those are the ones that respond. Parks has a lot going on, 21 parks and amenities. We have Reinhardt, kind of the crown jewel, if you will. 1 community park, we have 6 neighborhood parks. One of the sometimes forgotten pieces of parks, what they do is right-of-way maintenance. So things like the E and F Street confluence area, that really nice attractive median there that has some of the art. We care for that. We have, of course, the spray parks, all the playgrounds. There's just a number of amenities, all of which take a lot of work to care for and maintain and plan for. Another somewhat recent addition for the Parks Division is the forestry program and having a full-time urban forester. That position is actually split 60-40 between community development and public works. We share that position. So here's a look at the overall parks maintenance budget. You see the personnel services there. There's an increase due to the minimal step cost of living adjustment. The materials and supplies includes things like plants and trees and pesticides, janitorial, paper, soap, all of that good stuff. There's a bit of a decrease there. Overall, you'll see that we took a hard look, largely as a result of the City Council's earlier efforts this year to trim down the budget to achieve that $2 million goal. And in this particular one, we did reduce by about $106,000. So this slide just kind of takes a closer look at the contractual and professional services piece. Per council request, the withholding amounts for the FY22 replacing aging equipment, that was extended. Again, you'll hear quite a bit more about that next week with Public Works, and the chief already mentioned that. We do have about half of our equipment in parks that's more than 10 years old. So there's repairs and things like that are always going on. So since that's a fairly sizable line item, what does that include in terms of the contracts and professional services? So we have a number of things, the janitorial, the parking lot sweeping, that's $6,000 there. That was newly added. That had kind of been part of what Public Works was paying, and now Parks is paying that. The janitorial and garbage is a big one, $129,000. We have contracts with companies that handle that service for us. And the landscape contractors, $110,000 into the landscape contracting piece. As I mentioned, they're the ones who are handling a lot of those right-of-way areas. So moving on to the aquatic services piece of parks. This is 100% general fund. We have one of the municipal services workers that, one of the 6 that's in the field, about a quarter of his time is spent focused on Caveman Pool, as well as a little bit with the spray parks. So this is the budget for just the aquatics piece. We're looking at a total in FY22 about $112,000. The main reason on that materials and supplies line is chemicals. There's been quite an increase in chemicals over the last year or so, and particularly things like chlorine for the pool. So the others include electric, We have to make sure our Public Works Department gets paid for the water that we use. Parks is a big water user, so that's part of that. We have about $23,000 in water and sewer, and then we have, of course, natural gas, about another $9,000 there. So that's some of the utilities expenses. And then the third piece of parks is recreation services. So we have 13 shelters throughout the park system here in Grants Pass. Those require somebody to make reservations and sort of monitor those. There's a fairly recent change in this category for us. Just last month we were notified that Recreation Northwest, who is the organization that's been contracting with the city for the last 20 plus years, has decided to kind of change their focus, and so they are no longer going to be providing that service as of the end of July. So we'll be sort of taking a harder look at this particular program. Everything from the volleyball courts to movies in the park and managing that, coordinating the use of school buildings and insurance coverage, and people that want to, use the fly fishing pool. I mean, there's all kinds of things that happen with this. All of the team sports and organizing. So it is. It's an important piece, and I think that we could actually, do more. We don't have a lot with our adult recreation services in the community right now. We have a lot of more on youth. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We have a $172,000 budget here. There's the current contract with Rec Northwest is currently $129,500 a year. So, a decision to bring those services in-house or, contract or do a hybrid, we are anticipating that amount, to be the same. So we'll work with that number. But we did drop that contractual line by $11,600. So that is parks. Moving on to our next division, economic development. There's a couple of pieces under economic development. One is downtown, tourism as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But for the downtown, these are the kind of main program elements that we have there. We have a downtown visitor services program, the enforcement using 2 CSO positions, and then maintaining the public infrastructure, the flower baskets being maybe the most visible one of those, you could argue. So some of the highlights in terms of what downtown looks at, these are several of these are LB projects. So if you look in the LB section of the budget, is the ornamental lights and what the Welcome Center facade improvements will be in there. The recommended FTEs for the downtown is 2.6, and here is the budget for this area. $551,485 is the FY22 proposal. There's a decrease due to the division moving to Public Works and kind of that realignment of some staff time. We also have materials and supplies, the hanging, as I mentioned, the flower basket that increased. Some supplies there. We have signs and bike racks and water fountains also that kind of result in a bit of an increase on that materials and supplies. Some of the larger contractual items under downtown are here. The downtown services contract. We have the trash and litter services. Aspire and the Gospel Rescue Mission are 2 of those that we contract with. They actually provide trash pickup services for the city. And the parking lot sweeping that was newly added in FY21. Again, that had been kind of part of what Public Works had been paying, so this is a shift over. And then, other services, the lights and things that all take electricians and other kind of specialists to keep our downtown looking good. Moving on to economic development, starting on page 154 of the budget book. So, economic development is really about far more than just the city limits. You'll see on this slide kind of the interconnection that economic development has with other agencies. And so, that building those relationships and having a foot in regionally what's happening within the economic development world is an important piece of being able to take advantage of maybe a new company that's looking at Southern Oregon. And so that's an important piece for us of becoming members of organizations. And you see on this slide that one of those organizations is So Ready. The Southern Oregon Economic Development, I'm not going to remember the title exactly, but that's $27,000 that we basically as a membership on that. We have the Small Business Development Center and Grow Oregon, $20,000 to assist small entrepreneurs, which is also what Launch Grants Pass is about. It's kind of a small entrepreneurial networking opportunity that we have, and we can use that funding for that. So most of the personnel in economic development is going for our economic development full-time staff person, Susan Searider, our business advocate, and then a little bit of my time. This is mainly funded by lodging tax revenues and is supplemented by some urban renewal funding. The business side, the development retention and other professional, those are kind of placeholders, as I mentioned, may or may not be spent, but when the opportunity arises to be able to leverage some money, that we want that there. So that shows a $306,000 budget for FY22 in under economic development. And finally, under the economic development, we have tourism. So the contracted and cooperative programs here, we have the contract with Experience Grants Pass that, of course, if you've been paying attention to some of the council meetings recently, there's a lot of conversation about the creation of our destination marketing organization, DMO. A starter board has been formed. The council made the decision to increase the lodging tax from 9% to 12%. And so that 3% increase is going towards these tourism activities. We do also support the Chamber of Commerce with about $70,000 or so. We have the Southern Oregon Visitors Association and Travel Oregon that are also related to tourism. So this slide is showing that we're basically the 2020 year, which is that last column of the 5 there, is remaining pretty stable over the last 4 years. We did see an increase in the last quarter in this year, anticipating maybe some of that being from people relocating as a result of the fires that were happening near the Medford Talent area. So here is where we see kind of the bigger change related to the DMO contract. The increase in projected revenues this year due to the lodging tax going from 9 to 12% is reflected in that second row, going an increase of about $430,000 under the contractual there and professional services. The other items I think are more or less stable, but that shows kind of really where the big difference is. Moving on to CD management. This is basically the 4 people that comprise kind of the overall management within the department. We have myself, we have our business operations supervisor, and then we have 2 front counter staff that work in community development. 100% internal charges for these services is where the revenue comes from. These provide overall management, service, and support to all of the community development divisions. And there's also a key piece that the front desk provides is for Public Works. They provide some customer service support for them. We handle lots of things related to advanced finance districts and other development tools. There's also a piece related to the committees that the city has. There's about 12 committees, and several of those are staff liaisons are within community development. The Urban Area Planning Commission, Historical Building and Sites Commission, the Parks Advisory, Urban Tree, Housing Advisory are all citizen committees which we help to organize the agendas and the minutes and kind of respond to commission requests. So a lot of that support happens out of this division. This is a look at that budget for the last 2 years. 647,448 is what we're looking at. There's a bit of a decrease in the personnel due to the last director's retirement. Under the contractual services, that includes temporary staff. We have our EnerGov permitting, which is a citywide software that we're using for managing permits. And it's a pretty robust program, but also expensive. So there's about $34,000 that we have in that line item to support EnerGov for our division, our department. And then the direct charges that you see there, $54,613 is for property management floor space. And then the contingencies, the total expenses for the department without contingencies is about $569,000. So there is a decrease there of about $34,000 in FY22 for that contingencies line. In the planning division, we're handling long-range planning and current planning. Lots of projects going on, particularly right now related to development code. There's several big amendments that are happening there. So the research and the staff reports and sort of managing that happens through the planning division. The community development block grant, CDBG, we're an entitlement community, receive $300,000 to $400,000 a year from HUD. That money is managed through a series of different plans, a consolidated plan, an annual plan. That happens through the planning division, kind of cooperatively with finance. And then, as I mentioned before, we also staff some of the main committees in the city. Some of the main projects going on, I mainly want to call out that second bullet there because I think this is something that sometimes gets overlooked. Just did a kind of a quick back of the napkin sketch a couple of weeks ago and thought that, we, depending on the month, could be spending, 10 to 12% of our time on code enforcement. Public safety provides the main interaction in terms of issuing the violations themselves, but if it's a development code violation, everything from fencing to somebody that may be complaining about drainage or an illegal land use or something, our staff are the ones who do that initial investigation and kind of prepare the background for the code enforcement officers to actually write up the formal violation. So that actually is an important piece, I think, for the community, that they know that our codes are being enforced, and so we do continue to spend quite a bit of time on that. And then floodplain management. We have one of our staff that is the designated floodplain manager for us and handles any permits that come in that require in the special hazard zone. They run through her. The planning division is 81% general fund, 19% fees. This was one of the areas where council made a change this year in looking at revenues. There's a $100,000 increase in the planning fees that's part of this FY22 budget. 2021 has proven to be quite another active year. We have 66 applications in the first 4 months. Everything from planned unit developments to subdivisions and partitions. There's just a lot that gets processed through our 3 planners who review those and write up those reports and present them to the Planning Commission and things like that. Just saying, an interesting comparison, in 2008, there were actually 7 FTEs in the Planning Division with 136 applications. So you can see there, 2020, we had 180 applications that we processed, and that's with staff of 4. So kind of building on what the chief was talking about, we're just doing a lot with a few people. Some good news, the division received approval to shift one of our positions, a senior planner position, got retitled to a housing and neighborhood specialist this last year, and we have completed that, the interview process, and we're hopeful that one of our candidates is going to be coming on soon. And then the principal planner role we have used for filling, we've used some temporary funding through or not funding, but the Rogue Valley Council of Governments. There's a planner there, and that's who we've been relying on for a lot of those services. So here's the planning division overall budget. FY22, we're looking at the increase of about $18,000 there under personnel. That's really just step and COLA increases. The contractual side, we do continue to use temporary contract employee for that principal planner that I mentioned. And then we also use temporary staff for things like the community development block grant management and the contractual services. 2 large programs that fall under that are a wetlands study. We have to have a local wetlands inventory. That is a requirement of the state. So there was a study that was done with that. We're continuing to kind of fund that. We also have the urban growth boundary rezone that we have relied on some consultants for that as well. So those are kind of the main pieces under the contractual, and this slide kind of shows that in a little bit more detail, some of what those consulting contracts for planning look like. We do use a third-party traffic engineer, John Rupplinger, who gets all of our applications that require some kind of traffic analysis, and so we do rely on him. We have a hearings officer that handles, maybe about a dozen applications per year, an attorney here in town that handles that. We also have completed recently an open space and scenic view inventory. So those are the kinds of projects that those contracts are paying for. We're members of the American Planning Association, and we have not enough room, so we have to have a little money to take all of our plans and store them off-site. So we have a little storage unit rental for that. And finally, our last division in community development plan, building and safety. So building and safety functions really almost like an enterprise fund. This is not any general fund money involved at all. Our building official and his 2 inspectors, as well as our permit specialist in the department, are kind of the main staff here, and they review plans, issue permits consistent with our Oregon building codes. The city is essentially a functioning as the state of Oregon's building department. We are implementing their codes. And about 12% of the money that we take in for fees goes, straight back to the state. We provide information and code enforcement, lots of work with people who have questions about improving their homes or business. So another busy division. There's 124 permits for calendar year 2020, and we've had 40 so far just in the first 4 months of 2021, with about 5,780 inspections that have been done. The current commercial projects that are in process, we actually have 10 that are valued at over $1 million that are active right now. Some of the big ones that you are probably familiar with, the Grants Pass Entertainment Center off of Redwood Avenue, I'm sorry. We have the Three Rivers Oncology expansion. That's an $8.8 million project. The Oregon Youth Authority has actually been making some sizable improvements out there off of F Street. Has some alterations out there. The Rogue Community College has a new science building you may have read about. That's a $6 million project. So those are some of the commercial side projects that are large that our building division has been quite active in. The building and safety also, there's just a slight decrease in staffing there. The materials and supplies is down just a little bit. The contractual services, the main change there, this last year we hired a new inspector who has all of his plumbing certifications. So we used to have to hire out almost all of our plumbing inspections in the city, and now we don't have to do that at all. He's fully certified in all the plumbing. We do have about $15,000 in there for an electrical inspector. And of course we've got training, we've got $11,000 for our fleet. Those inspectors are on the road a lot. The direct charges for CD management did decrease due to some reduced expenses. So the big item here you see is that contingency 1.8. If you take out the contingencies there, the total expenses is $724,000. That's down $71,000 from last year. And here's the overall summary. We've got a total budget at FY22, $9.3 million or so. The key differences, I think, I've already kind of pointed out. Economic development's up significantly because of that lodging tax increase. The revenues there going from 9% to 12%. And then the building and the increase due to a lot of those commercial projects and some of the proceeds that come in there. So I think that pretty well kind of gives the highlights on community development. Do you have questions for us and our team who are actually in the room now?
Rob?
Yeah, thank you. On the contingencies?
Rob, you gotta use the mic.
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, on the contingencies on your last slide, why was it felt that that amount needs to be increased almost $500,000?
I'm sorry, why does it have to be what?
Increased almost $500,000 on the contingencies.
He's speaking about contingencies on the building and safety.
Yeah, on the last.
I believe I can help answer that question, Brad, if you could potentially go back to that slide just so I can look at some hard numbers. It's the building slide. The building division is essentially its own enterprise fund in that all building division revenues must be used on building division expenditures. So it's kind of its own mini fund within the general fund. So that increase is not necessarily the need to increase that, but is just the reflection that more revenues have come in than expenditures have gone out. And one of the reasons for that is the volatility and the change in what happens in the building world. If more things are developed, the building division gets more building revenue, even if the expenditures are relatively flat, because it'll depend on the size of the project and the development. So that's why that number is going up. It's just to show that more revenues are being received than expenditures are being paid out.
Another way to saying that essentially that fund is turning a profit? I mean,
At the moment, but that really depends on the volatility of the market and the development that happens from year to year.
That's why the contingency, it being a little stronger, is a positive, because when the market slows, like it did in 2009 and 10 and stuff, we were really looking at building department having deficiencies. So this provides an additional buffer potential in the future. And as Adam mentioned, it is sort of like a standalone enterprise fund where the resources sort of need to stay in that fund.
up to how high that could get before a course correction would be needed? Like, what's the feeling on that?
There's not one currently related specifically to the building division. I know we've had a lot of significant projects happen recently. That is the cause for such a drastic increase. That's another one of those things that the analysis continues from year to year, and we're always going to be looking at that. I would agree with you. We don't want that number to continue to keep rising, but we do want to leave the building division in a healthy spot for future years, knowing that there will be uncertainty in future development.
Gordon.
For the Parks Division, it's been advertised that you have a $700,000 backlog. And it's even a broader question to Adam. How come every capital expenditure or every depreciable asset in this budget doesn't have a sinking fund? So if you got a 20-year life, there's money put away for that. Is that been done, or is it, and why shouldn't it be done on all assets that are depreciable?
Yeah, Adam, you want to comment? And I might ask Wendy to think about maybe coming up and speaking to as far as the deferred maintenance piece of that.
Yeah, as far as a sinking fund goes, and Jason, feel free to chime in, one of the land and buildings projects we talked about at the first meeting was the facility management plan, I believe is the correct name. And what that plan is going to do is really analyze all of the assets that we have and help to establish that sinking fund so that we're able to replace them as they're needed. That project is a step in that direction.
But up till now, is it true that there have not been, if you will, sinking funds? And is that why there is a $700,000 backlog?
I know we definitely have that sort of fund, especially for our vehicles and equipment.
Yeah, you do. That's excellent. I'm not complaining, no.
Right, so we're basically expanding on that same process. Another reason that hasn't necessarily risen to a high level of priority was because in the past, the general fund had a lot of discretionary dollars that could be determined, hey, we need to pay for this item this year, and the general fund was very much able to. Now that we're a little tighter in the budget, we can't just do that. Therefore, we have to plan, and we have to go through this facility maintenance plan and set aside those funds now.
Joel?
I appreciate your question, Gordon. And that those two projects, there was one, they should address that in the long term. Plus, there's also been a significant part of it that has been addressed. And the answer to your question, there's some significant parts that weren't handled that way. So, we do have a backlog in deferred maintenance. Last year, we increased some funding. We haven't spent it all yet to catch up on that maintenance. I don't see where this budget is going to decrease that deferred maintenance, or is it? So that was my question. So that it's adequately funded to catch up on that deferred maintenance and get where we need to be.
Yeah, we do have, I believe, about 10 deferred maintenance projects, in the works at the moment. Everything from those pergolas in Reinhardt Park to the B Street Jumps Park over here off the end of B Street. And in terms of we have, there's ongoing. So, is that deferred maintenance money fully 100% programmed? No, but we do certainly have identified, the Parks Advisory Committee has laid out what that list is.
So will this budget then continue to knock items off the deferred maintenance list?
Yes.
Okay, and so we won't have more come on then go off?
It's always. Yeah, I mean.
Okay, well, the other thing is that looking at all the assets of the park that we're going to do as part of our strategic plan should address that in the longer run so that we can get an even better handle on that and hopefully manage that even more efficiently in the future.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Tom?
Thank you for the presentation, very helpful. In the tourism division, there is a transfer out that you didn't describe, and I'm curious about the $200,000 of transfers out from tourism. I suspect that has to do with the increase in the lodging tax, but where will it go?
Yeah.
So that $200,000 and the preparation of this budget was before some of the more recent discussions on the DMO and potentially what to do with some of the leftover funds within the tourism division. However, I'm also working on a budget adjustment right now, which should send an additional $133,000 to the tourism division. So the funds are definitely there. That project specifically is, I believe, the restrooms project and land and buildings is where that $200,000 is going.
Was that the visitor center downtown? I mean, restroom?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Ferris?
Does your department, the Parks Department, do they maintain the trail up on Dollar Mountain?
So yes, there's the road, if that's what you're referring to, that's kind of historically been there that accesses the cell tower that's up there. There is portions of that that are technically on BLM or Josephine County property, but the city is, as part of the Dollar Mountain project, will be maintaining that.
I'm referring to the trail that goes up from near B Street on up.
Yes, that too. Yeah, there's a couple different access points, one off of Highland Loop and then one off of Crescent. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah, yes.
Yes, yeah, that's part of the Parks Division.
So we have Grants Pass public employees maintaining the trail, which is on Josephine County property, or which is in Josephine County, not in the city. Yet we can't have city police officers up there.
Yeah, let's have Wendy come up and maybe address as our Parks Superintendent.
Good evening. So to answer your question, we are just starting to work on those trails. We have a plan to further develop that trail off of Crescent that's been existing for many years now. The B Street access is actually not a trailhead. People have used it for many, many years. But as far as parks maintaining that access point that's not part of the city's property, we do not. It's complicated, but to answer your question, yes, we are responsible for that. The great thing is that trails bring out volunteers like no other park amenity that I've seen. We have the Rogue Valley Mountain Bike Association dedicating time and a letter of intent to continue to volunteer and maintain our trails, and other citizens that have just come to me and asked how can they help out. So it's really a cool thing to see that people are excited about it and really want to get in there and invest their own time on helping us maintain those points.
Gordon?
A question on Caveman Pool. If you look at the statistics, 18,000 people use that. I cannot tell you of another facility that gets that kind of use. Where are we on that, and why shouldn't that funding come before a new park, Dollar Mountain? And I know that's beyond your pay grade because that's a council decision, but I have a hard time, if you have an existing facility that's used by a ton of people that's going to hell, why are you buying new stuff until you fix that? It doesn't pass the sniff test to me.
So we do have about $280,000, in the Caveman Pool Fund right now that is being used, and we believe that that's it's adequate to run the pool for next year. If you are talking about in terms of just dig the whole pool up and replace a new one, you can throw $100,000 out, you can throw $500,000. That's not going to touch it. It's going to take a lot more money to get it. I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but in terms of a big new.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, at least what I read, the pool is on its last legs. You're doing everything to maintain it. So is there a plan to replace the pool? Let's say at $1 million to $3 million. I've seen the numbers. And when is that going to happen? And I guess my question is, why are we funding, for example, another new park in Dollar Mountain prior to a facility that gets 18,000 usage a year? Fair question.
I'll certainly let the council and the city manager address some of that, but I can tell you that there was a direction to form a review team. So actually, I think just last week, the 1 month advertisement to recruit people for the Caveman Pool review team closed, and we had, I think, 14 applicants from the community who were interested in being on that. So the Parks Advisory Committee is going to have 3 people join them that their sole purpose is going to be what your question is.
Okay.
And that's to review and analyze the future of Caveman Pool and present council with options. So
Yeah, the pool is a high priority for council, and this is just one of the steps in getting there. I think once we have some direction, council may have a better idea of how much and how to appoint the appropriate resources to that. And the Dollar Mountain thing, I think we received over $700,000 worth of grant funds. We just received another $100,000. So some of those dollars that are coming in there are awarded specifically as a grant to continue that project and wouldn't be in direct competition with some pool potential resources.
Valerie?
Yeah, I was just going to say that Caveman Pool is a high priority of ours, and I do know that in urban renewal funding, we have set aside $5 million for replacement costs moving forward. So we have a source right now of funding, but we have handed it over to a task force, which includes the parks and some citizens, to help us make the decision whether we want to keep it in the same location or we want to look at another location. So that's the first decision that has to be made, and then we'll move from there. So it is a high priority. I also was going to say that I do know that Travel Oregon just gave $100,000 to Dollar Mountain to try to help pay for the first phase of trail development. So, and we did get the Firewise grant, which was another $500,000 based upon us purchasing that piece of property. And my, I will say the same thing. As a destination and as a tourism tool, I think because we got the grant from Travel Oregon, I think a lot of people recognize that that will be something that could bring some more money into our community. So, that's kind of there. I was also going to ask, it seems to me that last year in the budget process that we actually set aside, I think it was like a big chunk of money from the sale of River Road Reserve to go into the deferred maintenance. Am I correct? For the Parks Department.
Yeah, some of those funds I think went to that. It was spread out through a number of specifically higher priority parks projects and things that were in the strategic plan.
Yes, it was, and I do know it was a big chunk. I don't remember, but it was like $700,000. It was a big chunk of money we put in for deferred maintenance to try to bring that up, because we knew that was something that we needed to get on top of before we move forward. And then at the same time, I do know that when we put in the track at the tourism, I mean, when we put in the soccer field out of the park, we started a fund to replace the turf early on. So I think that that's something that we have truly recognized that we need to do, that may not have been done in the past, that we need to do going forward.
Other questions? Jason?
Clarity on tourism performance measures in fiscal year 2021, which I assume that was set before we knew about COVID. But the tourism spending goal took a jump of about 15%, and it seems like it kind of reset to where you're increasing from there on. And from that, tourism revenue goals also up. Was that, do you know what the impetus was that for? Was it just realizing that in previous years you exceeded your goal and you needed to make an adjustment, or was there some new avenue of funding or new avenue of additional tourism spending that you're expecting?
Susan or?
It's page 162, the budget booklet.
I'm going to have to bring my book up here. So you're saying the 15,000?
Sorry, 15%. Your goals seem to be on a track of 125 million, 126 million, slightly stepping up, then all of a sudden fiscal year 2021, the goal tourism spending jumped to 140 million, and then of course the tourism tax revenue goal follows directly from that, from 5.2 to 6.9 million. So it's a significant amount of money, and I assume there was a reasoning behind it. I'm just wondering if anyone happens to know what the reasoning was.
I think that was more historical tracking of what revenues were coming in each year and what we were potentially anticipating based on the growth.
So it's really just looking at previous years, the goal
Yes.
wasn't meeting, and okay,
Yes.
let's adjust for the goal, and of course we didn't know COVID was coming.
Correct.
Right.
That's correct.
All right.
Good question, thanks.
Ryan? Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Brad. Regarding planning staff, I believe you said we have 3 planners on staff right now. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have 2 associate planners and 1 assistant planner. And we do have a planning technician who handles a lot as well, as technically not a planner position title.
Okay. I actually had a conversation with a constituent earlier today, and they brought up the fact that they were concerned. They were actually very pleased that we're getting the housing specialist, but they were concerned that we don't have a senior planner position, and I don't think we're looking to fill a senior planner position at this point. So I just wanted to, I guess, convey that to you, that I heard that today. And then I had a question about, and this might be Jason or somebody else, I'm not sure, but I was curious, what water rate does the Parks Department pay? Do they pay a residential rate, a commercial rate? Is there a special rate?
Do you want to address that, Jason?
They pay a standard rate just like any commercial account.
Okay. Thank you. And then just a couple of comments. I wanted to follow up with what Rob said about the Building and Safety Contingency Fund, and it looks like we're going to have about 2.5 years worth of full contingency in that fund with this new budget, which seems very adequate. So it might be worth having a conversation in the future about figuring out how to, I don't know if that would be reducing fees or how that would work, but maybe just addressing that in some way in the future. And then I have one more question about the Recreation Northwest contract. You said that they're stepping out, and we're not totally sure what we're going to do with that yet. Is that, obviously we could, get another contractor, or we could potentially bring it in-house. Is that something that is going to come to council, or is that going to be worked through just at a staff level?
So staff is working, through options right now to kind of just look at the pros and cons of, the in-house, the contract versus, or maybe a hybrid, using, the 140 or so thousand that is allocated for that. But we'll certainly bring it to city manager and present that.
Yeah, ultimately, we'll be providing a recommendation to council on the different options that's available to continue to provide that service.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Joel?
I just had three quick things. One is I commend the city because of the contingency fund. It's the opposite situation as with the public safety department, where you have revenues and costs, and revenues went up dramatically because of the projects this year. You didn't automatically knee-jerk reaction and have our costs go up. Instead, you looking at the long-term use of that, and I commend you for that. And I think that serves well the future for the citizens of Grants Pass. Mountain Dollar Park had a lot of public support. There was a public meeting. This room was packed. Everybody wanted to buy it. There was nobody that said no. There were some people maybe that didn't come to the meeting that I know they were against it. It is what it is. We are where we are, and we need to deal with it. The one thing that struck me was on that piece of real estate, the fuels were horrible, and it was just a disaster waiting to burn into the city of Grants Pass. And it still may happen, but at least we have a fighting chance of stopping it before it comes in. And that may well be worth the purchase price right there. Because it is a big public safety issue with fire that somebody probably doesn't sleep good at night because of that. Probably the homeowners that live up there, for one. Then the last thing is that committee on the pool. We do have an aggressive schedule to address that in a timely manner, and to look at funding associated with that. One of the things that strikes me throughout my life and my career, if we focus on scarcity, we create it. So like if you look at the Depression, everybody thinks the bank was going to run out of money, so what'd they do? They went to the bank and they grabbed their money, and the bank ran out of money. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. What I've learned since then, in my upper brain, in my higher thinking that all humans are capable of, it's how do you do, not do you do this or that, well, sometimes it comes down to that, but how do you do this and that? And that takes some critical thinking. It takes partnerships, it takes efficiencies, it takes the long term, and it best serves the people of Grants Pass. And I think we're all dedicated towards that. So, and I took too much time, I apologize. But good comment.
Tripp? Yeah, how much do you think the costs of the planning division are driven by the complexity of the land use code? And if it's a significant portion of that, how much of that is within the control of council action as opposed to state mandate?
Well, if you gave me about 3 days to write a white paper, might be able to come up with a, it's a complex question. It's a good one. I mean, there's been numerous studies that have looked at, that the complexities of codes and the additional costs that adds to development. I couldn't tell you, standing here in terms of what that amount is. We do have, because of Oregon's statewide planning goals and some of the Oregon revised statutes, a huge chunk of what we do is mandated. But as you inferred in your question, there is a lot that is in the city's control that the local development code can deal with that is not necessarily mandated by the state, but pretty much everything that we're doing is one of those two. It's either an ORS, Oregon Revised Statute, or a development code locally. The building codes, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of a little different matter.
Yeah.
Brian, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just had one more question on the deferred parks maintenance. Looks like we have currently close to $800,000 sitting in that account for use. And then this year, we're going to be allocating another $223,000 to that account. And I fully support us maintaining the parks, and I think that this is a very healthy budget. My question is around $168,000 of that is coming from the lodging tax. And I'm just trying to connect the dots between how we can justify deferred parks maintenance funding with the lodging tax dollars.
Yeah, Wendy may have a more complete answer, but I think one of the pieces to that is Riverside, has a pretty significant tourism element in terms of the draw. You could argue not during COVID, but certainly pre-COVID with Boatnik alone. But when you add some of the other events, so I think there's a connection there. And Reinhardt actually draws people from outside the community who use the ball fields and spend a night to watch their kids play ball or something. So I think that there's definitely a linkage there.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
I'd like to now receive comment from the public if they have any comments or questions. Seeing none, is there any general questions or information requests from the committee or the staff? Brad?
So I had a few more things from the last meeting about the lands and buildings projects, and I guess this would be the appropriate time to discuss that. But maybe before I get into the specific line items, I think kind of the overarching theme of what I'm bringing up with these line items is that our current budget philosophy is to fully allocate all funds every year and to not have any funds put in some sort of holding account. And so that, creates some interesting challenges as far as maybe funding new projects or funding things that may come up in the future when we're fully allocating funds to projects that, are multi-year or long-term projects that may not need to see all those funds right now. So I guess kind of my first point is that it might be worth considering some sort of, for all of the line items that I want to discuss. I know we're not going to be reallocating any funding in this budget meeting, but I think maybe having some sort of mechanism for council to look at these in the future would be good. And you could call it a policy bucket or whatever you want to call it, just something where items are set aside, and if the budget committee thinks that it's worth discussing in the future, they can do so. Because the land and buildings list that we have now, essentially that list was created, by previous councils, and we've had a lot of turnover with council in the last election, and there may or may not be some desire to change the priorities of some of the allocations in those land and buildings projects. So I don't know if it's appropriate for me to get into all of those line items tonight or not. I'm more than happy to do so if everyone wants to stay, but it might be more effective if we just have a mechanism in place where council has an opportunity to review these maybe after the budget process is completed. And, this is my first budget process with the city, so I'm just kind of like, I don't want to say I'm winging it here, but, there's a lot more knowledge in this room than I have. So if anyone else has thoughts and ideas on how to do that, I'd appreciate it.
So to answer your question, I think it may be inappropriate to go line by line and try and look at reallocation of programs, because you'd be looking at level of service that council really needs to look at. But to take the spirit of what you're talking about, I think the Budget Committee could make a recommendation to council, or could discuss a policy, the development of a new financial policy that would put away a certain percentage to the LB 000 project each year, or that the LB quadruple zero needs to have a certain amount in it each year as a target, sort of like our contingency funds of general fund being 30 to 40%. And so that's one of those items each year that is considered and looked at is, okay, we want at least $500,000 in that project. And so then that would be one of those items that would be looked at along with all the other LBs when it comes to general fund allocations of resources. So maybe making a recommendation of some kind of policy discussion or implementation with regards to putting aside a certain amount to LB 000.
Yeah, that could be a good option.
So would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Sorry, I think there may be more comments and more ideas before I want to do that.
Tom?
Well, I would just make a quick comment at this point, but what I'm hearing from you, Brian, is a sense that you'd like to see a little better definition of the priorities for establishing the projects and their funding in land and buildings. The 1-star, 2-star, 3-star process is what gets them there. The question that isn't totally answered is, how does that translate into dollar allocations in land and buildings? And perhaps there could be a process that involves more folks, perhaps Budget Committee as well as Council, in developing a plan, a capital allocation plan that would include all of the sources of capital, urban growth, property sales, transfers, so forth, and then identify the high priority projects and work together to recommend allocation of those funds.
Yeah, something like that would work well. Just seeing maybe a closer correlation year by year of the current strategic plan goals with the project list, because for example, there was a line item for a business innovation hub, and I know that was a partnership with RCC, and I know RCC has since sold that building, so those funds may no longer be needed there. So just as one example, and there's others too.
Valerie?
Yeah, I just like to add to the process and through the years that I've been involved with this, I think that we've pretty much followed our strategic plan off. I mean, that's why we do strategic planning as a policy board, is that's what we do, is because that's what we're doing, is prioritizing. And that's basically what the city then bases their process on, what the strategic plan. I think last year we had a hiccup, or in the last couple of years, because we sold River Road Reserve. And so basically what that did is that pushed more money through the system that more than we'd had in a very long time. And so under the circumstances, I would agree that made it kind of awkward, because it was just like we had this money and we felt like we had this certain crunch of time that we needed to decide really quick where to go. And I think as a council member, even at that time, I felt like, well, we're just basically plugging it in because that's what we do in the process. So I agree that, that kind of happened, and it might not be a bad idea to go back and relook at those. I'm just not sure exactly where's the best place to do it, because until there's always at the end of this is closing projects. And so, those you kind of assume they're closing. And I think that's something that I'd kind of like to look at as a budget, is every year look back at the projects at the end that are closing projects, so we can actually in our heads go back over and say, well, okay, what did we finish? Why are we closing that? Because sometimes it is something that a past council, I will just go with the West Caveman. I mean, that was a priority there for many years when I first on the board. But when I look at it now, it's ending. And it's just kind of like the discussion was never had as to why it was ending, as far as I'm concerned, on the council. But someone on the staff made the decision. So I agree, somehow a process needs to be added in, and I'm not sure exactly how to do it, but I do think it's definitely worth a conversation, and with the budget committee, because that's who I would like to have on hand, because if there's anybody else I would, want to have helping make those decisions, it's the people that we have chosen to come on board and go through the this process with us.
Jason?
It seems like, to me, this is not really a question of level of service. When you bring up line items, it becomes a question of level of service. So really what I think you're getting at here is a question of methodology and how the budget is really done. Not so much questioning why is this money here, that money there. It's, this is how we do the budget. Should we be doing the budget this way? And before we invent a new shape for the wheel, I guess my question probably for you, Aaron, is do we have identified a list of model peers? Are there other city budgets that if you do make a motion and we do form a team to look at how this methodology works for Grants Pass, are there other budgets we can look at and say, oh, this is how they're doing it, this is how they're and identify what does or maybe does not work?
I'm sure we can try and take a look at that, and like you said, so we're not trying to create something new with regards to the best practices from financial processes, and Adam would be able to do a little bit of research on that also from a GFOA standpoint, and seeing what other municipalities might do, linking resources to their strategic planning goals.
Yeah, because I mean, like for me, most of my financial, well, not most of my financial experience, all of my financial background and experience is not in city governments. Mm-hmm. It's in the private sector, and I can tell you this is not how we do it in the private sector. And it doesn't mean that that's not how we should do it here, because it's obviously different. But I'd be very curious to see how our other city, especially other cities we can identify as being peers of ours and peers that we respect in terms of how they're managing their money. And on to kind of what Val was getting at, I think that would be something, I don't want to speak for other members of the committee, but I think people who came forward to be on the budget committee would be happy to be part of that process, because I think that's a lot of the process that we kind of expected to be part of when we joined. And in addition to that, maybe it'd be worthwhile to, rather than start our first meeting with jumping right into this fiscal year's recommended budget, a review process of this, especially a lot of us, at least 1/3 of the budget committee at any point in time has been here for the previous budget. Mm-hmm. How did it work out? We allocated $900,000 here and it wasn't spent. Why? Is it a holding fund? Is it what? That might help. We've got a lot of questions here that might get answered in that type of process without having to get into the rigmarole of discussing the current budget. Mm-hmm. So. Mm-hmm.
It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think possibly addressing, part of what maybe Brian was trying to get at, he can correct me, but like if we looked at page 113 on the LB book, it might be helpful when you have a beginning fund balance to know when that fund was initiated, because it seems like there's dust on some of these. In other words, there's at least, you look at least 3 different ones that kind of look so similar, you even wonder why they were created as separate, and there's money in each one of them. So, LB 6084, vacant property and safety renovation. LB 6391, blighted building removal or replacement. LB 6403, property abatement and blight cleanup. And you just kind of wonder if one year or one council thought that, one of these projects needed funding, and it would seem to me that some of it, like I say, is collected dust and may not be needed, or certainly maybe they just seem so similar to me, but yet they have different line items, and I'm just not 100% sure if they're all still actually live and needed, certainly as separate line items. And maybe that's what Brian was, to some degree getting at, or part of what he was saying.
Other comments? Brian?
So I don't totally know how to proceed, but I guess I would maybe try to make a motion to request, after this budget process, a reconvening of the budget committee to discuss this further. I don't know quite what else to say.
Was that a second, Jason? Would you restate that? Because that's.
Sure. I make a motion to have a reconvening of the budget committee after this budget process is complete. I don't know, in the next few months to review.
Allocation of resources methodology for LB projects.
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Okay. What he said, yeah. Any more discussion on it? Okay. This is one where we're going to vote, and I want each of you to vote so that Karen could get it. State who you are and how you vote. So, start down there.
Yes.
That was Gordon.
Valerie Lovelace, and I vote yes.
Tom Bradbeer, yes.
Joel King, yes.
Tom Brandis, yes.
Rick Riker, yes.
Ferris Simpson, yes.
Trip Androy, yes.
Brian DeLagrange, yes.
Yes.
Vanessa Auger, yes.
Hell, yes.
Adam?
Telephone.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, you two on the telephone, can you hear us?
Yes, this is Linda Barkey, and my answer is yes.
Okay, and Steve? Steve, are you there? He's not voting.
He's not voting.
Because I can't hear him.
I can't hear him.
Okay.
Okay.
So that passes unanimously. So what we now need is a vote on the items that were brought up today in the budget. We need to have approval of that tentative budget. So I think I'm optimistic that we won't have to do it individually. So let's try it with those in favor. Raise your hands. Ah, it's unanimous. That was easy. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's try again. Are you still there, Linda?
Yes, and my hand is up.
Excellent. I can't see it. Never mind. Steve, are you there? Okay. As far as we can tell, it's unanimous.
So, Chair, what we would need is actually a motion and a second for that. That would be, and then a vote.
Good. Do we get a motion in a second?
I move that we approve the budget for public safety and community development.
Okay. And
Second.
did you say a second?
Yep.
Okay. Do we do it again? We'll do it again. In favor, raise your hands. Sorry. I tried the quick way, it didn't work. Thank you. It reconvenes on Thursday, 6 o'clock. Thank you all.